Israel moves into Gaza City and uncovers a tunnel underneath a hospital, and 45 American troops have so far been wounded by Iranian-backed attacks in Iraq and Syria. What's going on, everyone? Let's take a look at some updates as it relates to the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. I'm recording this at 11:30 a.m. Central on Monday, November 6th, 2023. Overnight, Israel says that they struck 450 additional targets, both in Gaza and against Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon. As a result of those strikes in Gaza, Israel says that they're able to eliminate Hamas leaders Jamal Musa, the head of the special security operations of Hamas, as well as Wael Asfa, the commander of the Deir al-Balah battalion. Additionally, Israel put out the names of two more soldiers that they say were killed during ongoing operations in Gaza. Those two names published over the past 24 hours. And then Al Jazeera, putting out information from the Gaza Ministry of Health, says that 9,770 Palestinians have so far been killed in Gaza, with 26,000 wounded. That number is actually down from just a couple days ago. It's probably 3 or 4 days ago that number jumped. The number of Palestinians wounded reported through the Gaza Ministry of Health, through Al Jazeera, went from 22,000 to 32,000 overnight. And even with the intensity of the attacks and the ground operation ongoing, 10,000 in 24 hours was not, it seemed out of line. All right, so I haven't seen any sort of formal correction to that number, but it does look like, in terms of what the Gaza Health Ministry and Al Jazeera are putting out, they've adjusted that back down. 26,000, still an increase over the past couple days, but it's more in line with what we've seen from the start of the conflict. Additionally, they say that 152 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank, along with 2,100 wounded. Now, there's not been a lot of news about the hostages being held by Hamas in Gaza. That total number is estimated to be around 244. So far, we've seen 5 total either released or secured by Israeli forces. Hamas put out just in the last day that Israeli airstrikes in Gaza have so far killed 60 hostages, with an additional 23 missing. Now, there's been very little in terms of proof of life being presented by Hamas at this point. Every so often, we'll get a video showing maybe 1 or 2 hostages, but again, we're talking about 244 potentially still being held by Hamas. Really unclear how many of them still remain alive. Now, shifting over to the ground operation, Israeli forces a couple days ago surrounded Gaza City, and they have since begun moving into the outskirts of that urban area. Now, there's been a little bit of back and forth in some of the analysis recently. On the one hand, people are saying, wow, Israel's moving really fast. Look how quickly they cut Gaza in two and made it all the way to the sea. And then other reports showing, a lot of the areas that they moved through were not heavily populated. They were already evacuated, relatively rural in some cases. It's a lot easier to move through that quickly than it will be to move through some of the urban areas in the middle of Gaza City, which is true. So now we're starting to see more of that urban fight. It's going to be a lot slower. It's going to be house by house, block by block kind of progress. Now, during this operation, the IDF put out some videos. They're continually talking about how Hamas is using playgrounds, schools, hospitals to stage military operations and to dig tunnels underneath to protect their fighters. And they put out a video showing one of these tunnels being discovered near a Qatari hospital on the coast of Gaza. So we'll pull it up here, the video, to actually see. These are some Israeli soldiers. It looks like a bulldozer right up against the hospital, finding the tunnel. If we go to like a Google Earth look here, you can see the hospital, pre-bombardment, and it links up, of course, or it lines up at least with what we're seeing in the video. And then the IDF put out a couple pictures, kind of close up, to be able to see clearly this is some sort of entrance to an underground structure. Now, I, of course, have not been in that tunnel, haven't seen any pictures or videos coming out showing, what is actually underneath the hospital, but it's in line with what Israel's been saying for a long time about Hamas using some of these protected structures to hide some of their military operations, and it's not a surprise. That's been the case for a long time. Earlier, Israel is putting out a lot more kind of graphics and animations, things like that, to say, here's what we think or what we believe are under some of these facilities. Now that they're moving into Gaza, we're starting to see actual pictures and videos showing where some of these Hamas tunnels originate. Now, Hamas put out a couple videos of their own over the past couple days. One of these showed multiple rockets being fired into Israel, both during daylight and at night, which is interesting. I haven't seen a roll-up recently. For the first few days, Israel's putting out how many rockets Hamas had fired into their territory. Haven't seen that in a little while now, but it's pretty wild if you think about it, that we're 1 month in to this war in Gaza with substantial surveillance over the battlefield. Now Israeli troops all around Gaza and in Gaza in certain points, and somehow Hamas still has the ability to store these munitions, move them out of storage, set them up, and launch them. Whether or not the launch point is eventually hit by Israeli forces is a different story. And it makes you wonder, if they were able to hide and store this many rockets for this long, what other surprises do they have for Israeli forces as they move in to Gaza City? Then we got another video put out by Hamas. This was presented as Hamas mortar teams firing on Israeli forces, but it's pretty clear that this is from prior to October 7th. The reason I say that is that we have seen mortar teams engage in Israeli forces so far at this point, 100%. They tend to be popping up, firing, and getting out of there because of the counter-battery fire, the drones overhead, the aircraft overhead. What we're seeing in this video, sandbagged firing points, mortars all in line, out in the open in daylight hours with ammunition storage points, things like that. It's just not realistic with the level of surveillance going on in and around Gaza right now. So, interesting video to see how Hamas is training, how they're presenting themselves. But again, this is not from the current fight. It would have been at the very least sometime before October 7th. Now shifting over to Iran's involvement and the potential for broader escalation in this war. Iranian media just put out that in the last few days, the Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh met with Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, in Tehran. Not a lot of information about what they talked about or the press releases after. It's pretty standard, what you'd expect. Iran supports the people of Gaza, U.S. supports the Zionist regime, et cetera, et cetera. But the fact that the leaders of Hamas and Iran are meeting in person in Iran, look, it's notable. Hasn't happened since the October 7th attack. Additionally, the Wall Street Journal put out this map that I thought was pretty interesting, showing the locations of where attacks have taken place against U.S. forces by Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and Syria. Additionally, news came out that as many as 45 U.S. troops have so far been wounded in these attacks, which is more than double the number that was initially reported. And to give you an idea of how close we are to U.S. troops actually being killed in some of these engagements, they say that in one case, a drone packed with explosives hit a building that U.S. troops were housed in, but it didn't detonate. So just, I don't know that, one American soldier dying in Iraq or Syria is going to trigger an all-out war with Iran. But, at the very least, there's going to be calls for escalation against some of these groups. And, we've already got people calling for direct strikes on Iran. It's just, this thing's simmering in a lot of ways. And on that note, U.S. Central Command put out that a guided missile sub had arrived in the Middle East. Unnamed, they didn't say which submarine it was. There's a reason that they call these guys part of the silent service. You never know where they are, but they can pop up and strike at any point. It is yet one more pretty significant capability added to this theater of operations. But that's all I've got for now. Of course, if interested in national security subjects, be sure to check out the sit reps I put out on Substack, 7 to 10 of the top stories each week, along with a few podcast recommendations. But thanks for watching. I'll see y'all next time.